He had no weapons. He had no army. He had no voice. Yet he changed the galaxy forever. This is the story of Kaelen, the slave who fought without fighting, and won without saying a word. The Colosseum thundered with laughter, echoing off the cold metal walls of the Veyron system's grand arena. Banners of 12 star nations floated high above the crowd, glittering like false suns under the synthetic sky. Today was no ordinary match. Today, pride itself would be on trial. Veyron, the undefeated champion of the Arcanis bloodlines, stood at the center of the arena. Her armor shimmered like liquid mercury, tailored to reflect the searing lights of the overhead banners. She was the daughter of victors, heir to warriors who had conquered entire sectors. In her mind, this was not a match. It was a performance. On the opposite side of the arena, a single gate groaned open. From the darkness emerged a figure barefoot, bare-chested, and bound in heavy iron cuffs. Chains dragged behind him, hissing against the scorched sand. No fanfare announced his arrival. No titles were sung. No weapons were granted. He was simply Kaelen. A name not given with honor, but assigned like a serial number. Property of the Veyron pits. Veyron watched him approach, unimpressed. Her silver lips curled into a sneer. "This is what they sent me," she said aloud, letting her voice carry to the farthest seats. A half-starved mammal without a past. The crowd roared with cruel laughter. Kaelen did not lift his head. He did not clench his fists. He simply stood. Veyron crossed the arena, the dust whispering beneath her armored boots. Face to face now, she leaned down close to him, her voice sharp enough to cut through bone. "You are not an opponent. You are an example." She spat squarely on his chest. The audience howled in delight. For a heartbeat, Kaelen remained still, the spit sliding down his scarred skin. Then, slowly, he lifted his head. Their eyes met. In that single glance, the energy in the arena shifted. The laughter faltered. The banners seemed to wilt under the weight of something heavier than fear. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was emptiness. The kind that could swallow entire empires whole. Before the crowd could recover, the signal blast echoed. The match was on. Veyron laughed again, stepping back with an elegant twirl, summoning her plasma whip with a flick of her fingers. It cracked through the air like a living thing, aimed straight for Kaelen's ribs. He moved. Not quickly. Not frantically. He sidestepped like a man who had already mapped the future. Like he knew exactly where the whip would land, and exactly where he would not be. Veyron's eyes narrowed. She lashed again, harder, faster. Kaelen stepped into the arc, his body weaving through the whip's hungry snap as if the laws of physics bent to him. Gasps rippled through the arena. She roared, spinning into a full strike, a lethal move meant to end this humiliation before it began. Kaelen caught her wrist mid-spin. Twisted. The snap of bone echoed, sharp and final. Veyron's plasma whip fell to the ground. The champion of 12 worlds stumbled, cradling her dislocated arm. Kaelen did not strike. He did not gloat. He did not speak. Instead, with a grace that mocked her lineage, he raised one open hand and slapped her. A single open palm strike, light as air, yet somehow heavier than any blow Veyron had ever known. The entire Colosseum fell into stunned silence. Veyron staggered back, not from force, but from something worse. Humiliation. Kaelen turned his back to her. He did not attack again. He did not roar in triumph. He simply walked back toward the gate, toward the handlers who waited with their chains. And the crowd, once so eager for blood, sat frozen, breathless, confused. Because Kaelen had broken her, and he hadn't even needed to win. He had needed only to endure. And in doing so, he had planted a seed of doubt across the galaxy that no blade, no bullet, no anthem could ever erase. The chains clicked shut around Kaelen's wrists once more, cold iron against scarred skin. But this time, the guards did not jeer. They barely dared look at him. He followed them quietly, barefoot across the corridors carved deep into the foundation of the arena. Around him, the walls whispered not with sound, but with the electric tremble of fear. Somewhere beyond the gates, Veyron Drace nursed her broken pride. But Kaelen felt no triumph. Victory, to him, had never meant applause. Victory was survival. And survival meant silence. Inside the dim holding cells, Kaelen sat cross-legged on the stone floor. No restraints, no guards standing watch. Not because they trusted him, but because somewhere deep in their instincts older than civilization, older than law, they understood. You do not rattle the cage of a beast who chooses to sit still. Kaelen rested his forehead against his folded hands, breathing steady. Memories rose, unbidden. He let them come. Memory, a long-forgotten earth. A girl with sunburned cheeks had once whispered to him, "Kaelen, remember, sometimes saying nothing is the loudest roar?" He had been small then. Smaller than the cages they would later build to hold him. She had been his sister. Or perhaps just another orphan from the ruins. In the aftermath of Earth's fall, family had become a matter of proximity, not blood. He remembered the way her eyes had looked full of dreams, even when the sky itself burned. "Promise me," she'd said, squeezing his hand so hard it hurt. "Promise me you won't waste your breath on those who don't deserve it." He had promised. And now, light years away, in the heart of an empire built on cruelty, Kaelen kept that promise with every silent breath. Beyond the thick iron doors, debates raged among the arena overseers. Should they ban him? Should they weaponize him? "He's destabilizing the arena economics," one commissioner shouted. "Viewership has tripled," another countered dryly. They did not understand. Kaelen was not playing their game. He was rewriting it without speaking a word. Elsewhere, across the galaxy, on a mining colony orbiting the dying star Talion, an old X-fighter named Joran clicked off his hollow screen. The footage of Kaelen's match still burned in his mind. He turned to his granddaughter, wiping grease from his wrinkled hands. "You see that?" he asked, voice rough like sandpaper. "That boy didn't fight to win. He fought to remember." "Remember what?" the girl asked, wide-eyed. Joran smiled sadly. "That he is not their beast. He is still his own." Back in the arena, a second match was announced. The new opponent, Thrax Morg. A gladiator of cybernetic strength, genetically enhanced for speed and brutality. The arena masters believed Kaelen would finally fall. After all, how could silence outmatch a machine engineered for destruction? Kaelen listened without moving. He bowed his head as if in prayer. But it wasn't fear in his heart. It was something colder. Something older. He stood when they called his name, or rather, the number branded into his arm, K1017. The gate hissed open. Dust swirled. The next battle awaited. Before he stepped out, an old woman, one of the arena healers, gray-haired and long past fear, touched Kaelen's arm lightly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Not all chains are made of iron, child." For the first time in days, Kaelen's lips moved. Just a fraction, just a ghost of a smile. He stepped into the light once more. This time, not as a slave, but as a storm the galaxy had not yet learned to fear. The gates of the grand arena groaned once more, shaking the ground like an ancient beast awakening. Above, banners rippled in the simulated wind, each bearing the sigils of fallen houses. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, a single organism holding its breath. Kaelen stood at the threshold. Barefoot. Bare-chested. Unmoving. Across from him, Thrax Morg exploded into the arena, a living monument of violence. 7 feet tall, his cybernetic arms gleamed under the brutal floodlights. Mechanical plates ran up his spine like the carapace of some extinct predator. Thrax raised his fists high, roaring loud enough to rattle the Colosseum walls. The crowd roared back. Crush him. Break him. Show us blood. Kaelen did not react. He stood like a stone placed by ancient hands. For Thrax, the match was already won. Another silent weakling to smash into dust. He charged, sand and metal clanging under his colossal steps. Kaelen's heartbeat did not change. He waited. Waited as the storm approached. 5 feet. Thrax's first punch thundered forward, a hammer built to end wars. Kaelen blinked once. Then he moved. Not backward. Forward. He slid inside the arc of the strike, so close he could feel the heat radiating off Thrax's massive frame. One step. One breath. Kaelen's elbow found the soft gap under Thrax's armored ribcage. 2 precise strikes, sharp, fast, surgical. Thrax grunted, confused more than hurt, swinging wide. Kaelen ducked under the blow, his foot sweeping low, striking at the hydraulic joints behind Thrax's knees. The giant stumbled. The crowd gasped. It was not luck. It was not chance. It was inevitability. Thrax roared, furious now, pounding forward with a flurry of wild, brutal swings. Kaelen weaved through them like smoke between falling pillars. Each movement was clean, economical, not a single gesture wasted. And then, in a single heartbeat, Kaelen's fingers found the access port beneath Thrax's cybernetic spine. Click. A faint whir of systems failing. A hiss of compressed fluid. Thrax stiffened. One step forward. Then another, faltering. He collapsed, face first, into the dirt. The crowd didn't cheer. They stared. Mouths open. Eyes wide. Hearts hammering. because it hadn't been a battle. It had been a dismantling. Kaelen turned away without hesitation, without celebration. He did not need applause. He needed only truth. The truth that strength was not in noise, not in size, not even in violence. True strength was knowing exactly when to move, and when to stay still. In the upper box seats, Veyron Drace watched, her silver-clad fingers curled tightly around the railing. She had thought herself humiliated before. Now she understood. That was merely the beginning. Kaelen was not fighting for survival. He was fighting for something larger. Something she could not yet name. Inside her chest, something old and brittle cracked open. Not hatred. Not pride. Fear. The purest kind. Far across the galaxy, on a rusted outpost on Delta Verge, a former general watched the footage in silence. His aide, a young officer barely out of training, leaned forward eagerly. "Should we study him, sir? Try to recreate his technique?" The general shook his head slowly. "You don't train that," he said quietly. "You survive it if you're lucky." The young officer frowned. "But why doesn't he celebrate? Why doesn't he show he's winning?" The general stared at the screen, watching Kaelen's bare feet leave faint prints across the sand. "Because he's not here to win, son," he said. "He's here to remind us why we lost." Back in the arena, Kaelen reached the gate. He did not look back. He did not raise his hands. The handlers approached, hesitant. This time, they didn't even try to chain him. He simply stood, still breathing evenly, as if none of it had ever touched him. Because it hadn't. In the silence left behind, the galaxy asked itself a single question. Who is Kaelen? But they were asking the wrong question. The real question was, what had they created and what would they awaken next? Silence, once confined within the steel walls of the grand arena, began to seep across the stars. It drifted through the neon jungles of the meteorite outposts, across the crumbling palaces of the Oran dynasties, and into the deep, frozen tunnels of the mining colonies on the fringe worlds. A single rumor, passed from trader to trader, dock worker to mercenary, took root. The slave who spoke with no words had defeated the invincible. On a distant agricultural planet called Varys Prime, a boy stood in the middle of a sun-scorched field, hands clenched at his sides. His overseer screamed from the hill, demanding obedience. The boy looked up and for the first time, he did not bow his head. He did not shout back. He simply stood still. The overseer's whip cracked in the air, but the boy didn't move. And others, the tired, the broken, the forgotten, began to stand beside him. No words. No threats. Just a wall of silence against cruelty. And on that day, the overseer retreated, whip dangling uselessly from his hand. A rebellion had started not with fire, but with stillness. In the orbital cities of Luxos, a group of gladiators approached their match differently. They no longer taunted their opponents. They no longer raised their arms to the crowd. They fought clean, precise, effortlessly. When questioned, they simply answered, "We fight like Kaelen." Across the systems, A subtle shift rippled through the hearts of the oppressed. They understood now. You don't need to scream to fight. You don't need to bleed to win. You don't even need to be seen only to endure. Meanwhile, the high councils of the great houses panicked. He's a virus, hissed the Chancellor of Rax. He's infecting the lower castes with dangerous ideas. They tried to bury the footage. Tried to erase his name from official archives. But it was too late. Because Kaelen had never needed a name. He had become something bigger than identity. He had become an idea. And ideas, once born, could not be killed. In secret backrooms of the arena systems, a low-ranking commander asked during a meeting, "Should we not find him? And him?" An older senator shook his head gravely. "No. You cannot kill a man who has already given up needing your approval." There was a long, fearful pause. "What can we do then?" The senator leaned back, staring into the shadows. "Pray," he whispered. "Pray he does not return." Back in a forgotten sector in a monastery abandoned long ago, Kaelen sat in meditation. Not hiding. Not running. Simply waiting. Around him, dust swirled through broken columns. Faded murals of ancient victories peeled from crumbling walls. He knew what the galaxy had become after his silence. He had not intended to start a movement. He had only intended to survive. But sometimes, survival itself becomes rebellion. Sometimes, refusing to break becomes the spark that burns empires down. Flashback. Kaelen remembered an old man he met once on Earth, before the world fell apart. The man had been frail, forgotten, sitting outside a market where no one stopped anymore. Kaelen had offered him food. The man had taken it with shaking hands, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Strength isn't in shouting at the world, boy. It's in listening to it scream and choosing not to scream back." In the modern day, throughout the known sectors, minor insurrections began to appear. No slogans. No banners. Just people refusing to kneel. Refusing to obey. And every time a soldier raised a baton or an overseer barked an order, there was now a chance the one standing before them would not fight, but would simply stand. And that terrified the powerful more than any gun ever could. Kaelen's silence had become a mirror, reflecting back the ugliness of a world addicted to domination. He did not need to shout. He did not need to conquer. He only needed to be. And in being, he made the galaxy remember something it had long forgotten. Dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered. And Kaelen had surrendered nothing. The stars above Veyron burned cold and unfeeling. Inside the council chambers of the 12 houses, fear wrapped around the senators tighter than their silken robes. It had been 2 cycles since Kaelen's last fight. 2 cycles since he had vanished. No trace, no transmission, no body. And yet, he was everywhere. Reports flooded in. On Baltir V, a prison colony once thought unbreakable, the inmates staged a silent sit-in. No chants, no threats. Just thousands of men and women sitting, refusing to move until the guards surrendered. On Drethi's station, merchant clans refused to pay tribute to the ruling syndicates. They lined the trade docks, heads high, mouths shut. On Zelvani Prime, entire districts stood still during forced labor roll calls, paralyzing production without lifting a single fist. No one said Kaelen's name aloud. But everyone knew, he had become a shadow too large to erase. Inside the Veyron High Council meeting, a holographic projection of Kaelen's last fight flickered in the center of the Grand Chamber. Frame by frame, they studied him, the calm eyes, the precise movements, the unbroken silence. He destabilizes loyalty, the Minister of Security growled. Without words, without armies. The Supreme Commander slammed his metal fist on the table. If we can't kill him, we must destroy his image. There was murmuring around the chamber. Stage a fake fight, someone suggested. Show him defeated. Spread lies, another said. Say he was a fraud, a lab-grown puppet. The Supreme Commander nodded grimly. Whatever it takes. Before he becomes not just a ghost but a god. Meanwhile, far beyond the Council's reach, Kaelen moved through forgotten ruins on a moon without a name. He had no plan, no destination. He simply followed the path where silence led him. Here, in the ruins of the old world, Kaelen found relics of those who had resisted before. An ancient mural of slaves breaking their chains without raising swords. A cracked statue of a nameless rebel, hand outstretched not in violence, but in refusal. He sat among the relics, running his calloused fingers over the broken stone. The past whispered through the dust. Not all battles are won by fighting. Some are won by refusing to become what they hate. Elsewhere, in the digital back channels of the galaxy, a rebel cell leader, known only as Rissa, posted a simple message. They can erase the footage. They can silence the media. But they cannot silence what we remember. Silence is our shield. Silence is our sword. The post went viral across a dozen systems. The Council scrambled to contain it. But it was like trying to put out a wildfire with bare hands. In the training halls of young soldiers, new recruits watched old footage of Kaelen's matches not as entertainment, but as lessons. See how he moves, the instructor whispered. Not to kill. Not to win glory. But to survive. To endure. They studied his restraint as much as his strength. And deep in their hearts, they began to ask dangerous questions their leaders could not afford them to ask. Why do we fight? Who do we serve? What if victory is not the loudest voice, but the quietest refusal? Inside Kaelen's mind, sitting by a broken fountain, Kaelen watched stars drift across the alien sky. He thought of his sister's voice. Promise me you won't waste your breath. He thought of the old man in the marketplace. Strength isn't in shouting. He closed his eyes and let the memories anchor him. He was not a general. Not a king. Not a symbol. He was simply a man who had refused to kneel. And somehow, that had been enough to change the stars. Back in the council chambers, the senators shouted, argued, threatened. But deep down, they knew. It was already too late. You can kill a man. You can destroy a body. But you cannot kill an idea once it has been carried in silence from heart to heart. Generation to generation. Kaelen had become more than flesh. He had become a ghost. A ghost in chains. And there is nothing more terrifying to an empire built on obedience than a ghost who has already broken free. It began with the small things. Tiny shifts that, alone, seemed meaningless but together, would one day topple kingdoms. On the battlefields of Acraeon, soldiers once trained to shout war cries before charging now moved in silence. They struck swiftly, precisely, without wasted breath. And they won. Their commanders barked at them, demanding the old traditions. But the soldiers only nodded and returned to their silent, devastating efficiency. When asked why they fought this way, they gave no grand speech. One young lieutenant simply shrugged and said, "Because it works. Because sometimes, words get in the way." In the grand arenas, new laws quietly took root. No pre-fight taunts. No theatrical humiliation. No unnecessary cruelty. The crowds grumbled at first, longing for the spectacle. But soon, they grew silent too. Watching matches with a new reverence, a new understanding. It was not the roar of the crowd that defined victory anymore. It was the stillness in the heart of the storm. On Varys Prime, where the first silent rebellion had sparked, the boy who had once stood alone now led an entire village. Not by shouting orders, not by threats. He simply led by example. Working, resisting, enduring. The overseers eventually left. Not because they were defeated in battle, but because they no longer controlled the spirit of the people. In the hidden schools of Drethi's station, young children learned history differently now. Instead of memorizing the battles of tyrants, they studied the silent moments. The times when one person's refusal changed everything. On the blackboard of one classroom, the teacher had written, "You do not need to scream to be heard. You do not need a title to leave a legacy. You only need the courage to remain unbroken." And beneath it, a single name etched in quiet honor: Kaelen. Meanwhile, in the high towers of power, the Council of 12 Houses, once so certain of their dominance, found themselves cornered. Their enforcers were less eager. Their citizens were less obedient. Their soldiers less willing to crush the silent ones. The old ways based on fear and spectacle were crumbling. And they could not understand how. Because no one had marched on their palaces. No one had stormed their gates. The world was simply changing without asking their permission. In hidden bunkers, in refugee camps, in forgotten towns, whispers filled the air. Stand like Kaelen. Fight without shouting. Endure without surrender. The name passed from mouth to mouth like a sacred hymn. Not in songs of glory, not in chants of vengeance, but in the steady, stubborn silence of those who refused to kneel. Kaelen himself, wherever he was, did not watch these changes. He did not seek recognition. He did not crave monuments. He simply lived. Quiet, unseen, breathing under different stars. But he knew. He could feel it in the currents of the universe. That the chains were breaking, link by link, not with explosions but with quiet acts of defiance. And that was enough. Flashback. Long ago, before the fall of Earth, Kaelen had stood at the edge of a ruined city with his sister. The buildings were ashes. The streets were silent. She had turned to him and whispered, "They can burn it all down, Kaelen. But they can't take what we refuse to give them." He had not understood then. He understood now. Back in the present, across 1,000 worlds, people planted seeds in the dirt. Not seeds of anger, but seeds of endurance. And one by one, silently, invisibly, a new galaxy was blooming. Not ruled by fists, not ruled by fear, but ruled by those who remembered what it meant to stand still and not bow. For many months, Kaelen was only a memory. A ghost whispered about in refugee camps, scrawled into hidden corners of factories, inked into skin by trembling hands who dared to hope. He was not seen. He was not heard. But he was felt. And then one day on a dying satellite orbiting a forgotten planet, a signal flickered to life. No voice. No face. Just a simple line of text, transmitted across the abandoned channels where no officials dared to look anymore. It read, "I wasn't born for this. I was broken into it. But when they finally gave me a voice, I realized I didn't need it. Silence is enough. Because they heard me anyway. At first, no one believed it. It had to be fake. A glitch. A trick. But in their hearts, they knew. It was him." Kaelen had spoken not with noise, but with a final whisper. Across the galaxy, on Varys Prime, the boy who had once defied the Overseer read the message aloud to a crowd gathered in the fields. On Drethi's station, rebel merchants printed it onto worn banners and hung them across their silent protests. On Akrion's battlefields, soldiers etched the words into their armor. It became more than a message. It became a creed. In the grand halls of power, the council received the signal too. They sat in their marble chambers, stone-faced and silent. There was no army at their gates, no riots in their streets. And yet, they understood. They had lost. Not because they had been outgunned, not because they had been overthrown, but because someone had shown their citizens that freedom is a choice made quietly, without permission. Meanwhile, in a small village where the stars could barely be seen, an old woman taught her grandchildren how to plant seeds. One of the children asked, "Grandmother, why don't we fight the way the stories say?" She smiled gently, brushing dust from the boy's hair. "Because sometimes," she said, "the strongest hands are the ones that choose to hold steady instead of striking back." She looked up at the faded sky and whispered, "Thank you, Kaelen." Flashback. In a crumbling ruin long ago, Kaelen had once asked his sister, "But what if they don't listen?" She had laughed not cruelly, but softly, as if she understood something bigger. "Then we stand anyway," she said. "Because our silence is not for them. It's for us." Final scene. Somewhere deep among the stars, a figure walked across a barren world. His footprints left no trail. His shadow stretched long under the twin moons. He did not look back. He did not need to. because the galaxy no longer needed his presence to remember what he had taught. Kaelen had not built an army. He had built a legacy. Not carved in stone. Not shouted from rooftops. But planted in the quiet, steady hearts of those who refused to be broken. True power does not come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from the one who knows he doesn't need to speak to be heard. And long after empires rise and fall, long after banners are burned and names forgotten, there will still be the whisper of Kaelen. In the end, Kaelen did not become a king. He did not claim a throne. No statues were built in his honor. No songs were sung across the stars. And that perhaps was his greatest victory. His legacy was quieter, simpler. It lived in the way a farmer stood a little taller when the tax collectors arrived. In the way a young soldier lowered his weapon when ordered to strike the innocent. In the way a mother taught her child not to raise their voice in anger but to hold steady in dignity. Kaelen had shown them something no empire could unteach. You do not have to roar to be heard. You do not have to conquer to be remembered. You do not have to win to leave a mark. Somewhere, across the distant edge of the galaxy, an old child's rhyme began to spread. They came with fire. We answered with silence. They shouted their strength. We whispered our freedom. The colosseums that once celebrated blood and spectacle grew empty. The rulers who demanded obedience found only quiet defiance. And the systems that thought themselves immortal began to crumble not with the crash of armies, but with the steady, patient erosion of the human spirit they had underestimated for too long. Final reflection. Maybe Kaelen was not just a man. Maybe he was a mirror. A reminder that deep within each of us is a voice more powerful than any scream. The voice that says, I will not kneel. I will not be less than what I am. I will endure. To you, watching this now, remember, you don't have to shout to change your world. You don't need a crown or an army or a title. You need only one thing. The courage to be still. The courage to be silent when silence says everything. If this story spoke to you, if you believe that real strength sometimes walks in silence, drop a comment. I stand with Kaelen. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their own quiet power. And if you want more stories that remind us of the hidden strength within, like, subscribe, and join our journey. Because sometimes, the greatest revolutions are not shouted from rooftops. They are whispered from heart to heart, just like Kaelen did.